Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. And happy International Women's Day. Today, we celebrate International Women's Day with a special webinar on addressing gender equality for all women and girls, 30 years after Beijing Declaration and the path to CSW69. So 2025 indeed is a special year. It marks the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, which is a landmark document on women's rights. And this year is also the 69th session of the Commission on Status of Women, or CSW69, which will take place from 10th to 21st March in New York. So today's webinar will explore these two important topics for advancing women's rights and gender equality. So my name is 𝗙cie𝗯𝗶𝗹, and I am the Communications Officer for Women for Biodiversity and the moderator for today's webinar. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Women for Biodiversity is an organization that advocates for gender equity in biodiversity conservation. We believe living in harmony with nature requires recognizing women's and girls' roles and rights with holistic solutions, and we champion these principles through collaborations across the three Rio Conventions, which is UNCBD, UNCCD, and UNFCCC. So before we begin, I'd like to share some house rules. Shruti, if you could go to the next slide, please. Yes. So please mute your mic upon joining the webinar. Please use the chat box to introduce yourself and tell us where you're joining us from today. Interpretations is available in Spanish and French. Please click on the globe icon that you see on the lower tray of your screen. This webinar is also being live streamed on Women for Biodiversity's YouTube channel. And please use the Q&A feature to post your questions towards the end of the webinar, or you can post them as it pops up in your mind as well. It's not a hard and fast rule, but that feature is available and for everybody to use. Shruti, the next slide, please. Okay, so today's webinar. In today's webinar, the speakers come from many different paths and backgrounds. So I will introduce them as I continue the webinar, and I hope you are as excited as I am to hear from them. I would also like to request all speakers to speak a bit slower than usual so that our interpreters can keep up with you and so that they are not rushed in the interpretation as well. So with this, I will welcome our founder and director, Mrinalini Rai, or many know her as Tina as well, to open the stage and to set the stage for today's webinar. Hi, Tina, the floor is all yours.
Hi, everybody, and happy pre-International Women's Day. I just dropped my headphones. Give me a second because I'm at the airport. Okay. This is what happens, making things work. So thank you so very much, and Sumina also. And I just want to take this opportunity first to thank everybody who have joined us from different parts of the world. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. At my side, it's good evening. I'm calling in from Thailand. So it's an immense honor to welcome you all today as we come together to commemorate International Women's Day, a day that not only celebrates the incredible achievements of women, but also highlights the ongoing journey towards gender equality and empowerment. Today, we reflect on the progress we have made and renew our commitments to advancing a world where every woman and girl can thrive. So as we celebrate, or are going to celebrate, are already celebrating, we also mark a significant milestone, the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action. So 30 years ago, the world came together with a bold vision to create a world where women's rights are human rights and where all gender equality is no longer a distant dream, but a tangible reality. The Beijing Platform set forth 12 critical areas of action, calling for transformative change in education, health, environment, economic environment, political participation, human rights, to end violence against women, and more. So as Sumina shared, we are also in preparation for the webinar because next week, which is 10th of March, the 69th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, the CSW69, will begin in New York, which reminds us both of the victories we have achieved and the challenges that still persist. This 69th session will mark the 30th anniversary and will also focus on reviewing and appraising the implementation and assessing current challenges to achieving gender equality and women's empowerment. As we are still seeing, since the Beijing Platform for Action and since the first time with International Women's Day was commemorated, it's older than me. It's more than 50 years old. And we still see that still women and girls are still facing the challenges that were set forward to having addressed. So, but however, it's not only about remembering the struggles, but also to embracing the possibilities of the future. So as we are here today, and with all what's happening around us, still looking at on the positive side of things, together, let us make a promise to continue to work than just over 30 years, but also pushing forward with renewed vigor and determination. Right now, we need it the most. Let us continue to advocate for policies to ensure equal opportunity in every sphere of life. Let us create safe spaces for women to live free from violence and discrimination. Let us amplify the voices of women, particularly those from marginalized communities, and empower them to lead. So I will not take any further, but I also would like to acknowledge each and every panelist who is here. I've known you all over so many years, and it's wonderful to be on this journey together. So thank you for taking the time to joining us today. So together we have the power to shape a world where women are not only celebrated, but are given the space, the rights, and opportunity they deserve. So once again, at the end, happy International Women's Day. Let us continue this journey side by side until equality is not longer a goal, but a truth for all, and always remembering that gender is not plan B. So once again, thank you. And I will be here. And Sumina, with that, back to you.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you for joining us from from the airport. and that's women. We always try to make it work no matter what. Okay, and also thank you very much for setting the stage for today's webinar. I also sometimes forget that I speak really fast, so I'm trying to really tell myself that I need to speak slow. Sorry, interpreters. Okay, so with this, I now welcome Ms. Ranji Reddy for the keynote speech. So Ms. Ranji is the Chief Director of Research, Policy and Knowledge Management in the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities in the Republic of South Africa. So I'm really excited to hear from her, and I hope you all are as well. So thank you so much for joining us today, Ms. Ranji, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah. Program Director, Ms. Sumina Suba, Ms. 𝗙ecie𝗹𝗹, right? Director, Women for Biodiversity, Ms. Mishi Singano, Director, Widow, Ms. Valentina Martinez, Global Forest Coalition, and Ms. Masla Rampado, Indigenous Women Network Malaysia, distinguished guests, all protocol observed. A very good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on wherever you are in the world. Allow me to wish you all a happy International Women's Day ahead of tomorrow. At the outset, Program Director, allow me to thank the Women for Biodiversity for extending an invitation to deliver this keynote address on this to this August webinar today. It is indeed a great honor to be addressing such a platform of experts in the field of biodiversity and environmental issues. Madam Sumina asked me to highlight the importance of international mechanisms like the Commission on the Status of Women, which we call CSW, and talk about why the Beijing Platform for Action is so important for women and girls everywhere. So as we commemorate International Women's Day on 8th March this year, under the theme, For All Women and Girls, Rights, Equality, Empowerment, it is indeed happening at a very interesting nexus with that of the commemoration of 30 years since the 4th World Conference on Women held in Beijing, China. This was indeed a very significant and historic milestone where women from all parts of the globe gathered together to demand their human rights, equality with men, and measures to accelerate their inclusion into humanity, to be recognized as equal citizens with the same rights, privileges, and advantages accorded to men. Women make up more than half of the world's population. They hold up half the sky. So the collective activism of the women in 1995 in Beijing led to the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and the Platform for Action. This document is a global blueprint for gender mainstreaming, with actions which, if they were to be fully and effectively implemented, would achieve gender equality and women's full and effective empowerment everywhere. Now, over the past few years, the iteration from the UN Secretary General and the Executive Director, UN Women, is that no country in the world has yet attained full gender equality. Yet we all know that this is the target for 2030 under the Agenda for Sustainable Development and the 17 SDGs. This year, starting on 10th March to the 21st of March, as Madam Rina has indicated, at the UN headquarters in New York, the UN Commission on the Status of Women, CSW, will be undertaking a global appraisal of the progress made in implementing the Beijing Platform for Action for Women's Empowerment and Advancement and the achievement of gender equality. UN Women, which is the UN organization dedicated to gender equality and the empowerment of women, and a global champion for women and girls, was established to accelerate progress on meeting their needs worldwide. Now, UN Women does its work through the Commission on the Status of Women, which is the principal global intergovernmental body exclusively dedicated to the promotion of gender equality, the rights, and the empowerment of women. The CSW is instrumental in promoting women and girls' rights, and it documents the reality of their lives throughout the world, and it shapes global standards on gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. The Commission's mandate is to lead in monitoring and reviewing progress and problems in the implementation of the Platform for Action, and to mainstream a gender perspective across UN activities. Now, having said that, the UN CSW executes this mandate through the Beijing Platform for Action. This document comprises, as we heard earlier from Madam Rina, 12 critical areas, focusing on women and poverty, education, health, economic empowerment, violence, armed conflict, human rights, institutional mechanisms to advance women's empowerment, participation and representation in leadership, governance, and decision-making positions, peace and security, the environment, and the girl child. Now, important for us on this platform is critical area of concern K, which deals with women and the environment, because it impacts and affects your work. Program Director, what is of serious concern, though, is the backlash that these endeavors that we've been making at this global level that has been receiving over the years. And within current geopolitical crises that we are currently going through, there are major pushbacks on the gains we have made as the world's women and girls. We must collectively resist this, and we must push back the pushback. We cannot allow the gains made on sexual and reproductive health and rights be dwindled away, nor can we allow the recognition of the diversity that exists among and between us as women be whittled away by conventional and conservative forces seeking to backpedal on the agreements made at the Fourth World Conference and subsequently at the various UN CSW sessions. Now, distinguished participants, this morning, ahead of International Women's Day, the new UNICEF Plan International and UN Women report was released, highlighting the gains that have been made, but that efforts they are remaining insufficient. Despite significant achievements in areas such as education over the last 3 decades, millions of adolescent girls across the world today are still out of school, ill-equipped for the future, facing gaps in life-saving health services, and at the risk of harmful practices such as child marriage, female genital mutilation, violence, and abuse. This new report is titled Girls' Goals: What Has Changed for Girls? Adolescent Girls' Rights Over 30 Years. And it reviews how adolescent girls' lives have changed in the last 30 years since the adoption of the Beijing Platform for Action, endorsed by 189 governments in 1995. Some of the key facts that I've pulled from this report shows that 122 million girls remain out of school globally. Nearly 1 in 4 adolescent girls who have been married or partnered have experienced intimate partner violence worldwide. And 50 million girls alive today have experienced sexual violence. And today still, 1 in 5 girls globally marry in childhood. These are just 3 major facts I lifted out from the report. Clearly, there is much to be done, and accelerating the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action, as well as SDG 5 on women's empowerment and gender equality, has never been more critical. We have come a long way, but we have miles to go before every woman and girl's potential is recognized and protected. Empowering all adolescent girls is the surest way, the surest investment in a more sustainable, equitable, and peaceful world. So, Program Director, allow me to say something as well on women and the environment before I conclude. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation disproportionately impact women and girls, and more especially in the global south. It exacerbates existing vulnerabilities, and more climate change is having an impact. In South Africa, we are experiencing, terrible climate change effects in the last couple of months. But yet our leadership as women and our contributions to the to environmental conservation and to environmental justice remains underrepresented. And we are underrepresented in decision-making processes. So what I think is very critical for us today is to acknowledge that mainstreaming gender into climate change adaptation is very critical, and it's needed urgently. There are huge interfaces with issues such as science, education, technology, technological change and innovation. But it is encouraging to see that mainstreaming is beginning to happen with the Global Biodiversity Framework and other instruments in this regard. And the issue of women's representation and participation within this space is beginning to take hold. Climate change is one area where women have not been included in decision making, in policy, or at the program development level, and also have no or limited access to the huge funds available for climate change mitigation. This area of work has fundamentally remained the domain of men, and it needs to change. And I say, it needs to change today. This is up to all of us here today to ensure that this happens. Program Director, I hope that I didn't exceed my 10 minutes. I thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ranji, for such an eloquent speech and for saying the things that is already on our minds. I mean, we must push back the pushback. What a beautiful line that is, and how true it holds to all our challenges and our struggles. So I thank you so much for that. With that, I will now move towards our panel discussion. So today on the panel, we have Ms. 𝗙cie𝗋𝗶𝗹, who is the Director of Policy at Women's Environment and Development Organization, or WEDO. And then we have Ms. Valentina Martinez, who is the Gender Justice and Forests Campaign Coordinator at Global Forest Coalition. And then we have Ms. 𝗙ecie𝗹𝗹𝗶, who is the founder of the Indigenous Women Network in Malaysia. I welcome you all. And I also want to add that I'm personally very excited to hear from this panel of diverse speakers who have so graciously accepted our invitation to be here today. So thank you for that. Okay, so to begin with Ms. 𝗙cie. Hi, Ms. 𝗙cie, thank you for joining, even if it was, even if you were hopping from one webinar to the other. Okay, so I would like to begin with Ms. 𝗙cie, and I want to ask you, what policy changes are critical to ensure that women's rights are central to global biodiversity conservation? And what key policy recommendations do you hope will emerge from the 69th session of the Commission on Status of Women, or CSW69, as I believe you will be attending the CSW69 next week?
Thank you so much, also for inviting me and for having me to this session. And as I said, today, because possibly because tomorrow is weekend, so all the International Women's Day event have been held today. So we've been running from one room and one webinar to the other, but really delighted to join all of you. And thank you, Tina, and thank you, Ranj. Like, quite a powerful presentation. So without further ado, allow me to reflect on the question that I have been asked in terms of what is policy. But when I was preparing, it was so easy to come to say, yeah, we need to change this policy on participation. We need to change this policy on financing, for example. But we operate in a different world and different sets of the circumstances. And what is happening now around the world really require us to critically think on how have we been winning, right? And what we consider wins, and how strong those wins are, and how do we institutionalize those wins, and how do we make those wins weather the storms. Because what we have seen now across the board, this is not just what is happening in the States, but we have seen it in other countries, in Colombia, in several African countries, that the one change of government in Europe as well, with the rise of the conservative leadership, one change of leadership can erode all the gains that we have achieved. It can dismantle institutions, they can dismantle institutions, they can They can repeal laws that we have fought for so long. They can socialize the entire society using several radical measures, including false news, cooking evidence and all that. And we have seen that happening. And to me, I think that this is quite a moment where we really need to reflect on how we are winning and what are we asking for. And that's sort of like take me back to what most of the feminists that have been asking for the longest time, that what we want is the system change. If we have to deliver the goals of gender equality, if we have to deliver the goals around conservation, if we have to end climate crisis, we need to have system change, because as much as we've tried to fix the current system is so delicate or volatile that it can easily be set back to default, right? So it was quite a moment where I felt like possibly as a feminist, we need to go back to demand one thing and one thing only: how to change the entire system. And by system, I mean system of political governance. How do we get our leader and elect them, and the power and the mandate that they have? We are in the world where we have vested so many power in political elected leaders, partly because maybe I'm not that old. Maybe by that time the founding father were wise and we trust on their judgment, but the circumstance has changed. Now, the people who are going to the political offices have been driven by greed and immense accumulation of power and wealth. So they're not getting this position to save the planet or to restore our biodiversity or to end climate crisis. They are getting to this position to immense more power, to have more access to our natural resources, etc. But also we need to change economic models. The model that we have now, they are not fit for purpose. The model that is embedded in excessive consumerist nature of the society, objectifying our natural resources. Like everything now has a dollar value, and if it doesn't have a dollar value, then it's not valuable. So the role of biodiversity in terms of care, the role of biodiversity in terms of protection of sovereignty of the society, of a medical value, etc., all those are not seen as the value if, for example, it doesn't provide cash transaction in terms of in terms of, for example, carbon credits, or in terms of land grabs and huge plantation in the agroeconomy and all that. And in all this, I'm saying all this in the context that our rights as women and our voices as women, unfortunately, are being placed on this model that are not working. So as we fight for our rights, as we fight for our position in the society, it's become all fragile because the basis of what we are fighting for is not working. And it is important as in terms of like a recommendation moving forward, which is we can take it from like a holistic system approach, but we can also dive in and dilute it to what resonates in terms of the police work that we are doing. But I think there is, if we have to ensure the voices of women and the rights of women that need to be granted, we really need to have policies, processes, and system that systematically invest from harm and invest in care. Like most of the resources are on the wrong side, and women and planet have no resources because most of the resources have been invested on harming the planet or robbing women's rights or destroying the biodiversity, etc. So we need to shift that, and we need policy, we need processes, and we need mechanism that can allow that shift of disinvesting from harm and investing in care. And also importantly, I think I've said this, we need to democratize leadership. And this is not just the question of adding more number of women, but is the leadership democratized in terms of is everyone having the voices? We have seen increasingly women have been just added to just get the column and get the number so that we can say we have ticked participation box. We have this number of women consulted, but the decision have been made now it's not just been made by ordinary men, it's just been made by the powerful few men, in most of cases, corporations who make those decisions. So how do we democratize governance in our communities, in our country? Because it is until then that our voices will be heard and our views will be used and our expertise and our knowledge can be utilized. And last, I think Aranj has said quite eloquently on the role of multilateralism and how that plays. We need to shift the to change multilateral processes. As of now, for example, with withdrawal of the US, it's sort of like seem like everything will collapse because we have built the multilateral process based on colonial and historical legacies. And because of that, it served, gave a few countries power over the other, and thus it has been so hard to attain progress in this process. In the CSW, we expected, being 30 years after the adoption of the platform, adoption of the plan of action, the progress has not been made, and I think it was said quite clearly. And I think specifically the area that underperformed consistently is the area related to a priority area K. It has not been performing well, and partly because it has not been priority, and part also because of the silos. So in most of the countries, the gender institutional mechanism is just focusing, for example, on what we call the gender priority issue, which is violence, leadership, SRHR, maternal health, etc. And issues around environment are just led with the Ministry of the Environment. And the connection between the two is seriously, there is massive gap between the two ministries. So when we are in the CSW, we have to struggle to get the voices in the analysis around climate and biodiversity. And unfortunately, even the ministers who are holding those portfolios, it's hard for them to grab because they're not the traditional issue they have been working on. And we've been told like negotiation on this political declaration has been extremely tough and technical when it comes to this particular agenda item. And again, when we now engage in the Ministry of Environment, they push us back and continue to say, that's the gender issue, go talk to the Ministry of Gender. Here we are talking on the science of the environment, of biodiversity. So that gap has led to a very minimal gains as of now. So we really expect that there will continue to be coherence. We know the UN have started to continue the one UN approach when it comes to gender. The work program that has been adopted in Baku has outlined the connection between different mechanisms and committed to increase coherence. The Gender Action Plan and the CBD has done the same. So we are hoping there will continue to be synergies, and we're going to build coherence. And the conversation like this as well help in terms of like building the synergy and putting the pressure. So we don't have a lot of high hopes for this specific CSW, if we have to be honest. But I think is a wake-up call that 30 years we are still not making progress, and something need to be done, and something need to be done urgently. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mishi. Thank you for, again, eloquently expressing so many things in such a little time. It must have taken you a lot to compress all of that in 10 minutes. But yes, you said you're not very hopeful about the CSW69, but then I think that's also one of the reasons why we need to speak up louder than before, because like you said, we need systematic changes. We need policies and processes in place that will not only be, that will not harm the earth and be welcoming to women and girls everywhere, especially in policy making spaces. And thank you for that. Okay, and then we go to our next panelist, who is Ms. Valentina. Okay, just a second. Sorry, I'm sorry for the delay. My my browser got stuck. Sorry. Thank you so much. All right. So my next panelist is Miss Valentina, and she's the Gender Justice and Forests Campaign Coordinator at Global Forest Coalition. So my question to Ms. Valentina would be, so what are the biggest challenges women face in securing land rights? And how can global frameworks like the Beijing Platform better support gender-responsive forest policies?
Thank you, Sumina, Shruti, and Tina for inviting us for this webinar. And I am really happy to listen to 𝗙cie and Ms. Ranji, because part of the reflections that I'm bringing today, sharing with you all, is somehow in line with several elements that they just mentioned. We heard from the previous speakers that the Beijing Declaration and the Beijing Platform is a landmark instrument, right, to demand equal rights. And as Ms. Ranji was saying, 30 years ago, we were demanding equal rights. This is unbelievable, right? But yes, it's actually there. And we are here today remembering that the Beijing Declaration is an instrument to demand equal rights, to recognize women as human beings, and ensuring the full implementation of human rights in the sphere of women affairs, right? But unfortunately, after 30 years, land rights are not guaranteed, which is also connected to different gender oppressions. I'm going to mention 3 challenges. It is really difficult to summarize and include the many, many challenges regarding land rights in just 10 minutes, but hopefully in the Q&A session, or if you want to complement or have more reflections on this, feel free to do it. But 3 key challenges regarding land access for women is related to, first, the consistent discriminatory laws and social norms that we still have in the different landscapes. Women's rights to inherit property, including husbands or family properties, are, continue to be denied in more than 100 countries, and this is unacceptable. And those inheritance laws continue to be a threat, right, to ensure women's equal rights, opportunities, access to resources, and of course, the Beijing Declaration is really clear in terms of demanding that states must urgently change those laws that impose barriers to women and to have access to land. But I would like to point out something that is critical regarding this conversation on regulatory frameworks, and is to include the colonial approach, because sometimes in many countries of the global South, we see that there are regressive laws, but those laws are a consequence of the colonial legacies that we have in the global South and the modernity system of state that we have, that has been oppressing women and has been perpetrating colonial systems, colonial norms that include this type of discriminatory laws. It's unbelievable to think that less than 1 in 5 landholders in the world, worldwide, are women. And this is also unacceptable. Again, we are here to gather, to reflect, but this is the reality. 1 in 5 landholders are women. And if you compare to the contributions, we are responsible for the world's agricultural workforce, for the continuation of life, for we're custodians, women are custodians of seeds, are custodians of preserving traditional knowledge, and yet 80% of food in developing countries is produced by women, and yet they are not being recognized through proper and equal land rights. A second thing that I would like to mention as a challenge today is the effective implementation. And this is connected to what Ms. Ranji said in terms of institutional mechanisms. And 𝗙cie also mentioned something around that. We need funding to implement laws. We need good laws, we need robust laws, but we also need resources to implement those laws, to improve capacity building, particularly in local communities, in very small villages, which is critical. Many of the capacity building processes that come through the so-called green funds stay at the capitals of the countries, and we need real action in terms of dismantling gender oppressions through these capacity building processes. And the other issue is in terms of access to decision making. This is also crucial to improve land tenure and also to reform those laws. So if we are having progressive laws in some countries, like the case of Bolivia, for example, like the case of Brazil with indigenous territories, the TOCs in Bolivia, etc., those progressive laws are also, women are also being considered in the decision-making of the implementation of those laws. Those are questions that need to be asked. The third challenge that I would like to highlight today is the extractive industries component. And this is connected to the triple crisis, but also to women's access to land, right? Particularly from indigenous peoples and local communities. And we need to adopt, states need to adopt measures to prevent private corporations, private elites, and other actors, business actors, from grabbing land to develop extractive industries, including monoculture tree plantations, mining, and other extractive industries that are harming forests and the bodies of women. We need territories free of extractivism, and as this is something that we heard in every gathering and in every meeting, and this is important to be put in the table. I would like to highlight very briefly one example from that we documented with one of our member groups in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And as we know, the DRC holds the largest portion of the Congo forest of Central Africa, right? Which represents around 100 million hectares. And that area is also the territory of indigenous communities, including the Banyamwezi and the Motondo communities. But there's a big mineral boom there. And now, as we speak, there is a conflict that has been escalating and, you know, increasing the gender violence against women and their territories. And these mineral booms, which includes exploitation of coltan, cobalt, and tin ore, is a big problem in these communities because the DRC in the North Kivu province, where right now the conflict has been escalated, there is a Canadian company called Alphamine Resources who has been exploiting the BC Rich mine, the BC tin mine, and of course, significant portions of land were expropriated from local communities without any free, prior, and informed consent. And there are documentations of cases of young girls who are being victims of sexual exploitation and abuse. And again, this is unacceptable. We need to use these instruments like the Beijing Platform, the Gender Plan of Action, and other gender instruments that are there to connect the dots, as 𝗙cie was saying, you know, to break those silos and actually end the cycle of exploration, the cycle of poverty, of violence, and the discrimination against women. Finally, on the question on how the Beijing platform could support better gender responsive forest policies, I think that we have to be very critical on this issue. I know that we need to be here in these spaces, that it is important for us to be here to participate, to voice our concerns, but we have to be critical. And also use this instrument to push for substantive and structural demands that are going to contribute to actually solve the crisis. I think that one important element of the Beijing platform is the fact that it recognizes the failure of the capitalist model, which is based on patriarchal and colonial oppressions, right? That perpetrate forest degradation, biodiversity degradation, and gender injustices. And there's a line of action that is related to women and the environment in the Beijing Declaration, and it actually recognized that the major cause, and I'm quoting, of environmental degradation is the unsustainable pattern of consumption and production, particularly in the Global South. So these models of extractivism, these models of forcing countries from the Global South to develop extractivist projects to catch resources and sustain their models cannot continue. And we need to denounce it. We need to use these platforms and spaces to demand that the failure of the model needs to be exposed and it needs to change now. The other issue that I think is important of this instrument is the capacity building. As I mentioned, you know, women's land rights are a catalyst to end poverty, to end exclusion, and achieving food security as well, because they are the first, you know, the responsible actors, the main key actors in providing food security in different communities. And this is also connected to the SDGs, right? So civil society, government, actors, we need to build capacities from a participatory approach and support the design and implementation and monitoring of the different policies and programs. And finally, I think that it is important that we participate in these reflections and go to these high-level spaces, but I really believe that a strong feminist movement is good for to have healthy forests. If we have a strong feminist movement that is connected, that is in line with the structural causes of forest degradation, of biodiversity degradations, we will have healthy forests, we will have healthy ecosystems, and the Beijing Declaration is really clear about it. The participation of women's groups, grassroots organizations, women's networks, community-based collectives or organizations with their full respect of their autonomy. Autonomy is fundamental to have an effective implementation of the different interventions that we develop in terms of gender action. Thank you, and also happy to have other exchanges and reflections with you.
Thank you, Valentina. One of the things that I've been recently reminded of is that I ask a lot of loaded questions. So I've been accused of asking very complex questions to people that I come across with. And this was definitely a complex question that you have so beautifully answered. And yes, a strong feminist movement is needed and will be beneficial for healthy forests. I think that's the key takeaway from this as well. So thank you so much for your answer. And with this, I will now move towards Ms. Masla. I think when I say that Indigenous women are crucial in protecting biodiversity, I think all of us will be in agreement, right? So to Ms. Masla, my question is, from your experience, what are the biggest barriers Indigenous women face in advocating for their rights and traditional knowledge? And how can global processes like the CSW69 better support their leadership? For our audience, Ms. Masla is the founder of the Indigenous Women Network in Malaysia as well.
Thank you, Ms. Sumina, and happy International Women's Day, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending wherever you are now. Thank you for inviting me to this important conversation. And thank you for the previous speakers. Valentina already highlight about the land rights, and is very significant with the indigenous women. And Ranchi also highlight the challenges for the women, and you just double it or triple it for indigenous women. So indigenous women play a crucial role in protecting biodiversity. As a indigenous woman myself, I'm grown up in the forest, a small village in the forest, and biodiversity is very important for our life. Rivers provide us with water, forests support our economies, food supply, and medicinal needs. The wisdom of our ancestors and elders help us to fulfill our role as stewards of the land, territories, waters, natures, and our cultural heritage. But unfortunately, our existence is not recognized by the government. Our rights always denied. Um, However, the deterioration of the ecosystems due to deforestation, climate change, and pollution led to indigenous women losing the access to vital resources such as clean water, food resources, and medicinal plants and materials for culture practice. So, just last month, just share with you, we conduct a finding mission to assess the impact of climate change on indigenous women, and the impact is significantly affects their daily lives, like food, uh, cleaning, and health of the family. And we also try to documenting the traditional knowledge of indigenous women from different area. Um, in our efforts to cultivate medicinal plants, we are using polybags to grow up the plants, and we go to the forest, collect the seedlings, and try to plant it um, closer to our home. But from that project, um, we find out that most medicinal plants thrive only in their original habitats, such as areas near rivers, in the forest. They cannot grow up, you cannot simply plant it. So this underscores the importance of preserving biodiversity, a role in which women excel. It's proven by numerous studies confirm that the participation and leadership of indigenous women in managing natural resources lead to better governance and improve environmental outcomes. I will speak from context of Asia and my country, my own experience. Asia is a region rich in biological and cultural diversity, with indigenous women coming from variety of backgrounds. These women face numerous significant barriers in advocating for their rights and preserving their traditional knowledge. The challenges they encounter are compounded by intersectional factors. And most pressing challenges include cultural and social norms. Traditional gender roles often restrict women participation in decision-making process, both within the communities and in broader societal contexts. These norms can marginalize women's voices and contributions, being opinionated women as rebellious. Additionally, when women leave the communities without the family members, it is often perceived as a sign of low morality. And education, limited access to education and information can hinder indigenous women's understanding of their rights and the mechanisms available for advocacy. Illiteracy and language barriers often make it difficult for indigenous women to communicate their needs and demands. This gap affects their ability to engage with government and non-government organizations. And of course, indigenous women often associated with poverty and have limited access to economic resources. This economic marginalization diminishes their capacity to engage in advocacy and sustain their traditional practice. Living in rural areas, even accessing to transportation and lack of financial resources, just imagine how they can reach the authorities to voice their demands. And how they can advocate. So many indigenous communities lack legal recognition. Valentina already said just now, the land owning the land is almost impossible for most of indigenous women because of the cultures, because of the patriarchal system. And indigenous women often face multiple forms of violence, including domestic violence, sexual exploitation, and discrimination based on their ethnicity and gender. This violence creates an atmosphere of fear that discourage advocacy efforts. For example, indigenous women in Myanmar and Bangladesh face political conflict and exacerbates violence, while in North India, tribal wars contribute to a dire situation. Activists in the Philippines contend with great tagging by the government. And of course, indigenous women are underrepresented in the political processes and decision-making bodies from the community level to the national level. This exclusion limits their ability to influence policies and affect their communities and to protect the traditional knowledge. And now many indigenous women rely on natural resources for their livelihoods and cultural practices, but with the environment degradation, often driven by external economic interests, threatens their life and to further their marginalization. And the globalization also, the pressure of the globalization can lead to the appropriation of the indigenous knowledge, undermining women's role as knowledge holders. And CSW is a global body that addresses gender equality and empowerment of women. As I'm going to attend CSW69, I have expectation for these global processes to support indigenous women leadership, especially in Asia. First, recognizing the diverse cultural, economic, and political landscape in Asia is crucial. CSW69 can support leadership by developing policies and recommendations that are adaptable to local contexts, ensuring that they resonate with specific needs and conditions of women in different Asian countries. Because women in Nepal is different from women in Malaysia. Monitoring then accountability, establishing mechanism to monitor progress on commitments made during CSW69 and help hold governments accountable for advancing women's leadership. This can include regular reporting and assessment of gender equality initiatives. Number three, mobilizing funding and resources. The previous speaker already highlighted this, but you know, Asia is the biggest population of indigenous people, but funding in Asia is very small. And women is the, just imagine women already marginalized. So please advocating for increased funding for women initiatives and programs in Asia can help support leadership development. CSW69 can work with governments and international organizations to ensure that resources are allocated effectively to empower indigenous women. And also the capacity building that I already mentioned just now, invest in capacity building initiatives that empower indigenous women with skills in advocacy, negotiation, and leadership. And please, a recognition of traditional knowledge. Global processes should recognize and incorporate indigenous traditional knowledge in policies aimed at biodiversity conservation and sustainable development, and ensuring that voices of marginalized women, including those from indigenous communities, rural areas, and low-income backgrounds, are included in discussions and decision-making process. CSW69 can promote inclusive approaches that address the intersectionality of gender with other social factors. And lastly, work with us. Engage with indigenous-led organizations and network to ensure that initiatives are culturally relevant and responsive to the needs and aspirations of indigenous women. Thank you, Samina.
Thank you, Ms. Masla, for talking about the ground realities of indigenous women in Malaysia. And you also highlighted about the need for increased funding and the capacity building of women, and also recognition of traditional knowledge, which I think all the panelists will also agree to those points as well for better policy, for better biodiversity governance as well. So thank you so much for that. And I am aware that we are running a little bit over time. So if there is, I don't see any questions in the question and answer box, but I'm just going to give a few moments. If anybody has question, then they can just drop it in the box, or they can just ask the question in the chat box. Okay. All right, then if okay. If there are no questions, then that means we've done a wonderful job of being very clear with our thoughts and voices. Okay. Is any of the speakers, I open the floor to if anybody has any last words that they want to share with the audience. Yes, Ms. Ranji.
Oh, thank you so much, Suman, and thank you to all the panelists. I think what they've raised is very critical, and I think that the point that was made by Madam Singano, that she's not very hopeful with the CSW, part of me is also feeling the same way. I think that it would be very critical for you to create the space again post the CSW, so that we can come back and look at what needs to be done going forward, because there's huge money that is available for women, for the environment, climate change, but it's just not available for women. And I think that that's something that we need to look at quite seriously on how we take that forward. And lastly, Madam Chair, I just want to say that whole geopolitical situation that is existing at the moment, that I think will play itself out in the CSW, given the things that are happening now, will also play itself out in South Africa this year, as we host the G20 presidency. And yeah, it's already proving very interesting in terms of the first series of meetings we are having. But I would like to extend the invitation, and I think I will send it to you when we have our second, third, and fourth working group, because I think there's so much you have to offer to the thematic area South Africa is focusing on. So I'll be in touch, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ranji. Tina, are you on the call?
Yes, thanks, Sumina. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, I know we are over time, and Ms. Ranji, thank you so very much for your support. And I think looking at what everybody said, and especially also what Valentina you talked about, one thing that I think we really need to really look into, because we also realize that we not only engage in the so-called specific women meetings, right? But we, all of us, also actually follow different multilateral agreements, either as a climate, the biodiversity, the chemicals, the environment, seas, oceans. And I think one thing that maybe, yes, I know that it is has been challenging what's coming up with the geopolitics, with kind of bit also doubting what CSW is going to bring forward. But I think it will also be very good for us to come together. And I think that is our strength as a collective. And now it's also kind of, I'm sorry, I'm speaking my mind openly here. But maybe what we will try to do is have these, maybe not webinars, but collective sharing, even if it's public space like this, to just kind of bring more people, come up with ideas, sharing. It's also sharing experiences with each other. And how can we take back into our own spaces with different things, right? Like you're talking about, of course, CSW is there, and you have the Beijing Platform for Action, but also a lot of the things that people talked about on land, on environment, on the climate, is also linked up with the other multilateral agreements, the UNFCCC, the UNCCD, right? The CBD COP. And all of them also have a very strong element on addressing the so-called, but maybe watered down a little bit, but still the idea around the whole of society approach. And I think that's where we will really have to see is how can we basically come in arms together and do a bit more of sharing with each other and help each other to strategize and support each of the processes. And I think just and I think we need to have more informal conversations. And I'm happy to also see for all the participants who have joined here, please do reach out. There's nothing like having an expert way of saying things. It's just sharing experiences. And one thing I want to just bring back on what Valentina talked about is one thing that we kind of left the thread around is around this really innate understanding of this consumption and production, or sustainable consumption and production. And I just want to leave the thought at that, is because one of the things that CSW or the women's groups and what we've been really looking at, influence from the other work, has again been around transition, right? That's the talk that is kind of going on, this whole green transition. And we really need to be very critical and see these linkages, look at each other's experiences, come together and see how can we really put in a very strong agenda on saying that human rights should be respected, regardless of whichever agenda you're looking at. And those baselines are completely non-negotiable for any one of us. And I think this is where these interlinkages is where I see, and I think it's relevant for all women and girls around the world. I'm so sorry I took more time, but it was such an interesting discussion. And so wishing you all the best, who all are going for the CSW, who are going to be following. Once again, you can always follow these discussions and reach out to our panelists. They do some amazing work. And also saying that what I'll be taking forward, like I said, is next week. You also have the Human Rights Council, the 58th session taking place in Geneva, is where I'll be heading around, and also again pushing and building those collaboration around these demands or recommendations. So thank you so very much. Samina, back to you. And apologies for the interpreters, and I'm talking fast because I need to rush the gate. But once again, my heartiest thank you to each and every one of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tina. Sorry, I'm trying to pin all the panelists together and something went wrong. 𝗙ecie, can you help me from your end if you're there?
I think they're all pinned.
Oh, okay. All right. So thank you so much, everybody, from the panelists to the audience. Now I'm rushing because we're going a bit over time. Thank you so very much for this very insightful and very interesting discussion today. But before we go, one more thing. Can everybody please open up their cameras so that we take a group picture? Virtual picture group. Okay, one more. I mean, it's okay if you don't want to, but it would be very nice to see the faces of people who have come to our webinar, who've taken out their time to listen to us and to be involved. So thank you so much. Okay, so I'm taking a picture. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more. 1, 2, and 3. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to all the panelists, to our speakers, and thank you to everybody for joining from wherever you are today. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on our next webinar.